Hi everybody, it's Scary Whispers here. I wanted to start this video off with a thank you. The channel has just reached 10 subscribers, so I wanted to celebrate with you and give you 10 true horror stories. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Me and my cousin Al are very close. We always did everything together and have been mistaken as twins a lot. We would always do sleepovers when we were teens, so when Elle invited me to her house, I immediately said yes. Once I got there with $30 from babysitting, we headed to the corner store to stock up on snacks. My aunt trusted us as we were 13 and it was only a block away. When we got in, we noticed a guy about mid-30s in the corner just staring at Elle. We just ignored him and got our snacks and left. When we were walking back, Elle dropped one of the bags. So I picked it up and noticed the guy from the corner store walking in our direction. I thought it was weird, so I whispered it to Elle to not look back and to just walk to her house, which was across the street by this point. When we got there, we told my aunt and uncle, who were shocked, so they locked the doors and windows and put down the blinds. I opened the window because it was in the middle of Michigan summer. Me and Elle watched Murder, She Wrote until I heard the faintest crunching of leaves in the front yard. I turned off the TV and told Elle to get her dad, who said it might have been a raccoon, but slept in the room next to us to be safe. At 1 a.m., I woke up to Elle screaming and saw her being dragged out the open window by the guy we saw at the store. I yelled for my uncle, who came in and grabbed Elle and ran back outside chasing the guy. I grabbed Elle, ran upstairs and called the police, who arrested the guy. It turns out he had been stalking Elle for weeks and was planning on kidnapping her, and had an entire collection of things he took from her and pictures he took of her without asking. I still lock all my windows. I was in the USAF stationed in Omaha in the late 80s. At the time, I hung with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy. My roommate's name was Tracy, and the girl we hung out with's name was Stacy. So when we were together, everyone always thought we were lying and being the silly teenagers we were. We always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving and she had a bit of a lead foot. She must have been going too fast because before long a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on his lights. Stacy immediately pulled over And by the time the officer made it to her window, she already had her license and registration in hand and the window down. The officer looked at her and then looked at me and Tracy. He then said, "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off or y'all will be going to jail." He then turned, walked back to his car, and got in. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and talking among ourselves, wondering why he just didn't take Stacy's identification and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a few miles, then exited the highway. He drove a little ways and turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by stalks of corn. We all stopped talking as we became more alarmed. However, being young, scared, and since he was a police officer, we continued to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and pulled into an area that had a big beat-up old barn. As he stopped and we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point did we realize we were in mortal danger and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at me and Tracy, and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car and he motioned her to get in on the passenger side. She did. Tracy and I were crying, and as the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us, we began quietly praying for God to protect the three of us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt and somehow they would let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car and ran back to the car and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically, so of course Tracy and I began crying harder. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true all y'all are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where y'all came from. I better not see y'all again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As she drove back towards the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head no, she wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got in the car, she offered the officer her identification and told him she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked, "What are you doing with those 2 N-words?" Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. And then told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she also had given him her military identification. He asked her if we all were in the military, and between sobs, she said we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him off foot AFB. He then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there after Stacy told us what happened, I think it hit all three of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We did not report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed over a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years, all of the what ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were. I had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was a few miles from my house. I lived in a rural, wooded area, and my parents never let me go into the woods by myself. But they worked days, and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk through the woods instead of on the road to work because it cut about a mile off of my walk. So every day at the same time, I'd walk through the very much abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so until it intercepted a railroad track. Then I'd walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to my job. Stupid, I know, but I was 15. Taking this path always freaked me out, and I always felt like I was being watched, but it was shorter and less sunny and less hot, and so I ignored my instincts, thinking my parents' influence was just making me paranoid. My parents would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This continued for weeks. One day, I'm walking about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there are 2 porn magazine pages that had been ripped out and placed on the trail facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out as they were clearly intentionally placed, and probably for me, since very few people utilize this area. But I kept walking because if I turned around at this point, I'd have further to go to get out of the woods, and then there was a huge hill to climb to get back to my house, and no one would be around there to help me anyway. This was a densely wooded area with brambles and dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly, I could hear someone else walking close by. I stopped, and I would hear them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had change in their pocket, so I knew it wasn't any animal. But because of the echo, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Just to check that I wasn't crazy, I stopped once more and heard the same noise, which quickly stopped when I stopped. That's when I knew I was being stalked. My heart was racing with fear and my vision went blurry, but my instincts told me not to speak and not to run, but just keep walking down the dense deer path further into the woods. My gut told me not to look behind me. I could sense there was someone right behind me on the deer path now, but I did not look back. Now I'm a rather short, slightly chubby person, and looking at me you'd probably assume that I couldn't run very fast. So if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods, you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. And looking back, I think that is exactly what this creep was thinking. But back then I ran cross country and track and could run a 7-minute mile, and hills were my speciality. I always placed really well on hilly terrain. By no means was I a great runner, but certainly I was likely faster than whatever pedo creep was hanging out in the woods stalking a little girl. It's not that I was processing this thought at that time. I just instinctively knew not to run. Yet. I kept walking, seemingly deeper into the woods, because I knew the train track was up ahead, where there would be more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying to not look back, but something told me not to. While I walked, I felt like my entire body was shutting down. It's a feeling I've never felt before or after that day. It was the feeling of being prey. Everything went blurry and I could feel blood pulsing in my ears and my heart was pounding. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around, but I could feel someone maybe 5 or 10 feet behind me at this point, following me for a good 1/8 of a mile. I didn't turn around. I didn't scream because I knew no one would hear me. As soon as I got near the train tracks, which were elevated along a man-made gravel mound, I ran. And then I ran on all fours up the hill, gripping onto weeds to pull myself up faster, and then I sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lung and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, but now I was out in the sun, and the woods were dark, so I couldn't see what was behind the branches. I just kept sprinting. I never even saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I never cut through the woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents until I was 18 and had moved out of the house. I was too afraid of being grounded. Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007, 2008, me and a bunch of friends would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. A very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, 2 bathrooms, and one room we had no idea what was since it was always locked. But I'll get back to that later. This school hadn't been able to keep up with the 80s modernization of our town, and the large number of newcomers that followed with it, and as such it quickly closed down in favor of new schools and buildings by the end of the 80s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever of us got off school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure everything was empty and safe. As this building had earlier been known as the local spot for drug addicts and used needles and such, was a common sight for us by this point. So this one day, me and my friend were the first to get out of school, and as per usual, we take the walk down to the building. But upon entering and stepping out of the classroom and into the hallway, we immediately see a large man. I remember him as quite huge, but that might possibly be how he appeared to us as kids, and my friend lets out a huge scream. The man doesn't appear scared or shocked, and doesn't seem to react to us. But he turns to look at us and then asks, "Have you guys seen," insert my friend's name here. We tell the guy that we haven't seen anyone and only just got there, to which he sighs and shrugs, and then he pushes past us to leave the same way we just entered. Now our friend has an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was just looking for another random guy who just happened to have the same name was pretty low. But no one of us had ever seen this guy before, and I happen to know most of said friend's family as well. When we described what the guy looked like to our friend, he didn't seem to know who this guy could have been either. And for the next few months, we were too scared to go back. When we did return about 3-4 months later, it was the middle of summer vacation, and we thought it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing it, we found the roof to be rather weak and close to caving in. But something made us take the risk and dare to venture out on the roof after all. A hole in the roof, which we figured would have to be directly above the room we had never been in. The hole in the roof was only about the size of a football, and one of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm down in the hole and film the room using her phone so that we could all see what the room looked like. She puts her arm down, and as she is filming, she suddenly lets out a blood-curdling scream and immediately retracts her arm, but her phone is no longer to be seen. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand, and as we looked down through the hole, we could see her phone laying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof and entered the building, now intent on doing whatever it would take to get into that room, so our friend wouldn't have to return home without a phone and have to explain what happened. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door and put our hands inside. And when we tried to use the door handle on the inside of the door now opens without any trouble. We step inside and we all stare in silence. To this day I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I sincerely hope it has never been used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room is about 4 times 4 meters, and the floor and walls are all of solid concrete. In the left corner of the room, from where we entered, was 2 metal bowls sitting on the floor, and at the back of the room was 5 chains dangling from the wall. 4 with equal-sized cuffs, and 1 large that looked like it would fit around a neck. Needless to say, we swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. However, the room had us both scared, but also slightly intrigued. So after some talk back and forth that same night, we decided to go back to look at it again the following day. When we returned the next day, we found the door to be locked once again, and someone had covered the hole we made in the door with a large wooden board nailed on the door. Once again we immediately left, and after that visit we never returned. So this happened to me and my little brother. We'll name him Dylan. We lived together a few years back. I was a 25-year-old male and my little brother was 19. We were relaxing, playing some Halo 3 on the Xbox, smoking a bowl, just being brothers, hanging our usual daily days off from work. It was a Saturday night in the midsummer of 2009. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. Neighbors were just far enough apart you had privacy and they never got into your business. But we all knew each other, as our parents lived in the house for years, and it was our childhood home. When my parents retired, they moved off and left the house to us so we would never have to worry about a roof over our head. Now, our house is at the end of the cul-de-sac with a garage door to the right, and our front door is up 4 steps to the left of the window between our garage door, but from our kitchen you can see straight out when the curtains are open. This particular night, however, would grow to haunt me and my brother to this day. After a few hardcore hours of gaming, it's like 3 in the morning, my brother would need to get up and stretch his legs and relax his hands. He went down the stairs to grab some water and a snack when suddenly Dylan comes running up the stairs and locks the door, freaking the total hell out. I look at him and being confused as hell, barking, "Bro, what is wrong?" With a pale ghost white face, he looks at me and says, "There is a guy on the porch with his hands cuffed to the window, smiling from ear to ear." When we hear 5 knocks at the door, we froze in our tracks, backing slowly away from the door. I get under my bed and grab the machete and bat I keep under my bed in case I ever need to defend myself. I give the bat to Dylan as he's taller than me and has longer arms. We tiptoe back to the bedroom door and unlock it. We crack the door open just enough to see out. Then suddenly the man knocks over and over and over again. Before you know it, he had knocked at least 30 times, and then it just stopped. I told Dylan to grab my phone and call 911. He did, and dispatch sent officers our way immediately. While on the phone, the man went around the back of our house because we heard screaming coming from the backyard. The man was there, just looking at the bedroom window with that creepy ass smile. We stayed just out of the line of sight, peeking from the corners. Suddenly the man takes off in full-on sprint and threw himself into our back door. Oh shit, he's trying to break in our back door, we say to the dispatch officer. She tells units to step it up as he's trying to make entry. We hear the sirens closing in faster and faster as the man continues to bash himself into our door. On the third bash, we hear the door crash open. We stay as quiet as possible, listening to things in the kitchen being smashed to hell, and the man yelling, come out wherever you are." I whisper to dispatch that he's downstairs in the kitchen, and she tells officers he's made entry, and one unit said he was close. We ready our bat and machete as we hear footsteps creaking up the stairs. Then blue lights can be seen illuminating the house as we hear, "Police, come out with your hands up. Make your presence known." The man books it down the stairs and gets tackled by officers and handcuffed after a bit of struggle. We came out when the officers cleared the house and made sure it was safe. The man was high on meth, just looking to rob us to get another quick fix. We're so thankful for the officer that arrived when he did. We thanked him until the moment he left. He still came by from time to time to check on us and even played video games with us a few times. I still get nightmares of that creepy ass smile. I hope we never meet again. This story is 100% true, and honestly the scariest thing that ever happened to me. At the age of 15, I moved to Southwest Houston. I had moved around for many years, primarily due to being in foster care and not really having a strong support system or a family. Houston itself is somewhat nice, but naturally I had to be placed in a home in probably one of the most ghetto parts of the city. I was honestly one of the only Caucasian people in the area, which made it somewhat difficult to make friends due to the cultural differences and so on. I met a guy named David who had a girlfriend at the time. We soon became very close, and he became very flirtatious and somewhat protective over me. I also noticed he was deeply involved with drugs and had some major anger issues. I didn't realize how truly mentally unstable he was until after hanging around him and his girlfriend for a few months. One day we skipped school and went to the nearest skate park. Naturally, as young burnouts, we just lounged around, smoked weed, spray painted, and kept busting our asses on the ramps at the park. After about 30 minutes, we were approached by several guys wearing fully black clothing. I recognized a couple of them from my biology class. Next thing I knew, they began to attack David. He was thrown onto the ground, being kicked and punched repeatedly. I did my best to try and pry them off of David, but that only ended in me receiving several blows to the stomach and several areas of my body until I could barely get up. That day we both ended up in the emergency room. David told me not to breathe a word to anyone about what happened, which only created more problems for me, but I listened because for some odd reason I trusted him. A week later, David found me in the hallway early in the morning before the first period. He pulled me to the side and looked around anxiously, his eyes darting back and forth between different parts of the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked, completely thrown off by his sudden erratic behavior. "Those guys are going to pay for what they did to us," he whispered softly. "What do you mean?" I said nervously. "I have a gun. Miranda has one too. I'm going to take care of those fuckers today. Go home," he said through gritted teeth, reaching into his backpack and slowly revealing a black handgun. I quickly placed my hand on his, pushing his hand down further into the backpack. "David, don't let anyone see that," I whispered quickly. My heart was pounding, my head was spinning, and I felt a deep pit in my stomach. My mind raced 90 miles an hour. What the fuck was wrong with him? Why did his girlfriend Miranda also have a gun? What the fuck do I do? Fuck, I don't wanna get you hurt. I need to protect you, both of you. I trust you. I know you won't tell anyone," he said, quietly, his eyes softening. My thoughts continued to race, and I did the only thing I thought I could. Try to get away from him and tell someone immediately. "Alright, whatever you're going to do, just wait. Let me get my foster sisters out first." He nodded, and surprisingly he let me go. I raced down 2 flights of stairs, across the school courtyard, and finally made it to the principal's office. I opened the door without even knocking, which did piss our school principal off, but I cut him off before he could say anything and said David F. and Miranda H. both have handguns. They both brought guns into the school. A few minutes later, the school was put into lockdown, and my only 2 friends I had that entire school year were arrested. There were news reports, officers questioning me, and as you could imagine, I was grounded for quite a while for my choice of friends. I later decided to move away from that area because I wasn't sure what would happen to me if they somehow got out while I was still in that area. I don't know if they really planned to use the guns on campus. I just know that I was fucking scared. For me, for the other students, for the facility. And all I know is that maybe I saved someone's life that day. I was lucky enough to live in a large house when I was a kid. My father was a physical therapist. My house had a side room towards the back side of the first floor. My siblings called it the second living room because that's basically what it was. It had an old recliner, a small table, and a mid-sized couch. That's it. We hardly ever sat there. One morning I woke up sick, told my mom, and she told me to take the day off from school and stay home. My siblings had to be at school, and my parents worked, so that meant I had the house to myself. I laid around in the bed for a few hours until around 10:30 a.m. when I heard steady walking coming from the first floor. I thought nothing of it at first, as I just assumed maybe my mom went in late, like she did sometimes. I needed something to eat anyway, so I stood up and went downstairs to the kitchen. I made it about 3 feet in front of my kitchen's walk-in doorway when I locked eyes with not my mom, but a 6-foot-tall man wearing raggy and ripped up clothes. I was frozen in fear. I just stood there. It was only for a few seconds, but it felt like hours had passed. The guy just stood there and watched me too. No expression or anything. I eventually pulled myself out of the shock and bolted from my bedroom upstairs. I didn't hear him following me, but I got into my bedroom and locked the door and moved my dresser in front of it anyway. I pulled out my phone and instead of calling 911 like I should have done, I called my mom. I screamed into the phone, telling her someone was in the house trying to kill me. She told me to not leave my room for any reason and call the police. So I did. 15 minutes later, the police finally showed up. As I could see through my bedroom window, I watched them enter the house before I left my room to run down to them for safety. I told them everything that happened. They did a quick search of the home and found nothing. Not a single person or broken window or door. My parents both came home shortly after and were absolutely furious that the guy was not caught. I was extremely angry as well, but also relieved I was alive. The police began packing their things, but as one of the last officers was on the way out, he noticed a Walmart bag sticking out from under our couch. It was that damn couch in the side room, and well, what do you know? We found hundreds of trash bags and week-old rotting food under the couch, along with some other personal items like wipes, water bottles, and even a bag of piss. A bag of fucking piss. Whoever that man in the kitchen was had been living under our couch for weeks. I can't comprehend how none of my family members smelt any of the garbage that was piled up under there the entire time. The fact he never made a single noise under there also baffles the hell out of me. We've since then cleaned that room out completely and turned it into a breakfast nook with wooden chairs so no more shitheads can break in and find free housing in them. I go off to college in a few months, so I won't have to live in fear of that incident happening again much longer. But I still think about it every time I wake up with a cough. The following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely and I'd like to share it. I'm a teenager and I've been in scouting, Boy Scouts, for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and 2 girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy 1 year older than me. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost. and memorizing the surroundings as we went in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction while shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. Eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple Regetta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange and was stuck with me for the rest of the camp. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually none of the port workers would stay overnight except for the safety officials. I wouldn't be on the shift alone since the site has a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, usually there would be 3 guards, including me. Since the area was fairly big, there were different posts, but front gate was the main entrance area where all of the guards would be stationed overnight, since there was no need to put them in other posts due to the fact that there was no activity in the site at this time. The veteran guards that had been there for years would often say that the site was haunted, given the fact I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm actually a religious person. But I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks I never really saw or heard anything. Except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds, but nothing too crazy. Just to describe the setting to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions when there were big projects being constructed at the port, the workers would sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where port workers would require to stay at the port for a few days. There is a gym in this site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym there's a sauna, weights, and even a racquetball court. If you don't know what a racquetball court is, it's similar to an indoor tennis court with thin plastered walls and thick glass doors. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, me and Mike decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. This is around 2:30 a.m. and the entire building is so quiet that you can hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is off, and so is everything else. The only thing that's running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then after a few more minutes, we heard the loud thump once again. At first we thought it was our lieutenant, which could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumps on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought it was the air conditioner, but then we remembered that it was off. And even when it's switched on during the day, there's no reports of thumps coming from the air conditioner. After a few more minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me till this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym to where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlight and aimed it towards the clear glass door, and I got chills over my body and started to tear up so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means the loud thumps were the balls mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if someone or something was playing inside the cage. We were both so confused and frightened to how this was really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless and we started yelling and running away because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked why we were tearing and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why there's always guards that quit often. There's something evil in the area, and it's not the first time that something that bad has happened here. He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas and lights mysteriously switching on and off. Till this day, I still get chills recounting my experience with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now as I'm typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that. I'm a graffiti artist. Before you judge me and say I'm a bad person or whatever, hear me out. I work on pieces in my city, Birmingham in the United Kingdom. This happened a few weeks back. In the east side of the city, there is a canal that runs through the city, which is naturally full of tags and graffiti pieces, as it's a pretty quiet spot. But certain parts of it are visible to the public. It isn't easy to get down into the canal, but me and my friends stumbled across a hidden ladder in a run-down car park on the back streets of the east side. We climbed down and realized we could walk the whole length of the canals. The water was pretty high up on this day, so we had to be careful. After about 30 minutes, we had painted over old ruined pieces of graffiti, created new tags, and just generally had a good time. That's when we noticed the man standing on the other side of the water. At first we were startled, throwing our cans back into my backpack and getting ready to run as we thought we were about to get caught. However, the man just stood there. For a long while I stood watching him as he stared lifelessly at us. It was pretty unnerving. The guy had to be about 40 years old, with grey hair, but he was standing so abnormally. His legs parted evenly and his arms parted from his body at his sides. He didn't even move, he just stared. I looked at my friend, who I called Josh for this story, and he looked back at me. By the looks, unnerved, he decided to shout, "Hey!" at the man, and then, "Are you alright, buddy?" At first, I thought this was a bad idea, but I just let it happen to see the man's reaction. Nothing. He just stood there like a mannequin. We were pretty shaken up, but we just said to walk further along the canal and continue painting. About an hour later, we'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. We was now down to our last 2 cans of paint, so we was about to call it a day. When I stepped back to see what we'd created, just then I noticed the same man from before, standing in the middle of the dirty canal, just staring lifelessly at us. I was so surprised to see him that I dropped my can into the canal and turned to face Josh. He noticed the man too. The man took the first step we'd seen him take all day, towards us. We dropped the cans and sprinted across the path back to the ladder. We pretty much ran all the way back to the city center, where we caught our breaths and tried to figure out what the hell just happened.